Yeah, harvesting hemp. So I got to tell you a story. I have some colleagues from Case, engineers from Case that I've worked with over the years, and so when this came to me a couple years ago, I called them and said, "Hey, what do you know about hemp harvesting?" Man, that is really feeding back. What do you know about hemp harvesting? And he starts laughing. He said, "Yeah," I said, "I recall we did that a couple years ago. We destroyed 2 mower conditioners and a forage harvester." He said, "You're not getting any help from us." And so that was kind of the end of it from those guys. And it's a nasty crop. So if any of you that haven't actually started to handle it or work with it, yeah, you're going to find out that it's got some challenges with it. So, and I don't come with a whole lot of answers because we're still trying to figure this out as well. And part of what the challenge is we still don't know how we're going to grow it. And so there's a lot of variation in how this crop is grown, and so that's going to affect how we mechanize this, if we can do some mechanization. So this is going to be a challenge. So there is some precedence, and I've got some pictures to show up here. There is some precedent for some hemp harvest, and some of you have been on the internet, you've probably seen this kind of thing, but here's a combine, and this is for grain harvest. They're doing a dual grain and fiber harvest. So there's 2 heads on that combine, and the top head will clip the top off of the plants, take that seed and some of that material through the combine, and underneath that head, the red head down there, is one of those Kemper style forage heads, corn silage type of head, and that's cutting the fiber of the plant that's left and leaving it underneath the machine as it goes through. So there's some field crop mechanization stuff there, but again, this is for grain harvest and a little different production style. So this is a production style where they're sowing the grain rather than planting it on plastic at a wide spacing like you guys are doing. So it's a very different plant. As the plant comes up, you don't get the side branching and everything. All your flowers are on the top, so we can clip those flowers off the top and recover them that way. So there's some little bit of precedent there on that. Some of you have probably seen this machine on the Colossus Eon frame. Again, a dual purpose kind of a thing where they're got a head on the bottom that's clipping the plants, the fiber, so that they can recover the fiber later on, but the top is actually a stripper header, and they're stripping the leaves off the plant. So in this particular case, they're gathering that top part of the plant for forage, so they're actually using it for some animal feed and recovering that. So there's 2 separate streams that are going through. Of course, this is a $500,000 machine, and I doubt on any hill around here it would stay upright. So that's obviously not something that is appropriate for what we're doing. But again, there is some precedent for it there. We've done a number of different things running crop through. And I've worked with a local farmer. We were trying to just harvest the stuff running through the combine, and we actually did have some success putting that through. So he was growing crop on a wide spacing like you guys are doing. It was not on plastic, but it was a wide spacing, and they had a lot of labor that went in and hand weeded that crop to keep the weeds out of it. So he ran that through. Of course, these are 12-foot tall plants, and we're trying to get them through a grain table, and so it knocked most of the grain off before it actually got into the combine. So we were looking about 40% field losses there, harvest losses on that. So that didn't work well. So obviously we need some different solutions if we're going to do that long term. So he had a lucrative enough contract that he was able to make money even with losing half the crop before he got it into the machine. So he made sure that he was okay on that. So that's the precedent. And a company came to us a couple years ago and said, "Hey, we want this CBD." Now that's all grain and forage. It's not the CBD. So a company came to us and said, "Hey, we want to try to harvest this for CBD." And there's still this philosophy difference on how much this quality versus quantity kind of a thing. And I don't know that we've got that answer that anybody does, the agronomists or producers or whoever's going to try to figure this out. But this company came to us and said, "We just want the tops of the plants," and again, they were sowing it, so they were doing it in much denser spacing, so they weren't getting bushy plants. They didn't have flowers all the way down on side branching in the plants. It was just the top. So we just want the top foot or foot and a half of this crop and recover that to be able to take it to our processing facilities. And so we built this, and it's nothing real fancy, and nothing somebody else couldn't put together, but it's basically a combine head, cutter bar head that would clip the top off, had a sides discharge conveyor that we could put it into some other type of a receiving container. So, and that was, I can tell you some interesting stories about that, when you got people that don't farm and they take a bag full of green material and say, yeah, we'll store it for a week or so before we deal with it. You know, you don't know what that's going to do. So their solution the next time was to bring a reefer truck up and say, yeah, we'll keep it from getting hot. It's like, no, you don't understand green plant material. So that was kind of interesting, and that project sort of died. We've tried a lot of different things, and I know, as I understand what your general process is, and correct me if I'm wrong, and you know, this can be some interaction here, but as I understand what you're planning to do is hand cutting this material plant by plant. You're going to hang that and dry it. Is that right? Is that what I understand? You're going to dry it, and then we're going to clip those branches off and strip the buds and the flowers off of the branches individually then later on after it's dried. So it's going to be a hand process and so forth. There are a lot of people looking at doing that stripping ahead of time, and I've got two pictures here of some work that we tried to do, and this is with a stripper header, a shell-borne stripper header. If any of you are familiar with those, they use them in grain, small grains, wheat and stuff like that. So put that in the combine, you run like 6 or 8 mile an hour through a grain crop and strip the grain off of it. So we had a farmer and a processor that actually wanted to try this. And so my first thought was, yeah, you try that, you're going to end up with just a big yarn ball on the front of that reel there. And surprisingly not, it actually worked. So it did a really nice job. It stripped the leaves off of it. But again, we were looking at a sown crop, not a widely spaced crop where you got plants and branches all the way down with flowers all the way down the sides of the plants. So can we use some of this technology with that kind of a growing system? I don't know. And we're working with some other farmers. There's some folks in different parts of the state that are trying to look at different options with multiple rotors and things like that to be able to capture the leaves off of these kind of plants. But I still think the question, and you know, we keep beating this around in the academic levels too. It's like, okay, what is the best way to grow this crop? So do we sow it, a lot of seeds or something like that, and then we got flowers on the top? It's easier to mechanically grab that plant to recover the material, and then can we handle it, and what's the value of that when it actually gets to the processor? Are we keeping all the chemicals and the compounds that we need on those flowers till we get it there? And you know, what sacrifices can we make? So I think we're still trying to figure out where we're going to go with this type of with the production system. You know, what's going to be the best, what's going to give us the best yields and so forth. And so the verdict is still out on that. And so, you know, it's kind of hard as an engineer. I look, okay, let's harvest this, and somebody says, okay, come harvest this. All right, what's the plant look like? And you know, you talk to two different people and they have two completely different images of what they want to do and what product they want when they get off of that. So it's a challenge, and I feel for you guys that are kind of on the cutting edge of this, trying to figure out what it is that we need to get off the field. So you got to work real close with your buyers, the people that are taking this material, and make sure that you're clear. Okay, what is it that you want? What's the value to that? You know, can you accept this, and those kind of things. So those conversations have to stay open, and you have to be real clear about that as you go through. I tried to look at some mechanization options to help you guys with the process with this kind of one plant at a time, hang it in the barn and dry it kind of a thing. And there's not an awful lot out there. There is one harvester, I think probably several of you might have looked at something like this, that will actually cut a single plant, and all it does is cut the plant and conveys it up and throws it over in a wagon, and you got somebody there that can gather that thing and put it down, or stack it on a wagon so you can get it back into the barn. So that's kind of the extent in terms of gathering stuff out in the field. There may be some adaptations for some tobacco harvesters, and you know, we did some tobacco harvesting a number of years ago, and had some pretty substantial mechanical machines, relatively large machines that would harvest tobacco. And talking with some of those people, they're not sure what these stems are going to do, because you're going to find that these stems get pretty hard. I heard people using chainsaws on some of them when they get pretty big to actually get the things cut off. And so,
what's the cost of one of those?
So I don't. As I was coming here, it's like, man, I forgot to look at the cost, and I apologize for that, because I knew somebody was going to ask me that, and I wish I knew the answer to it, and I'm sorry I don't. So that's my bad. My apologies that I can't give you that cost. I really don't know what what the cost of that machine is. So that's what you got there. As far as the processing side of it, you know, hanging in the barn is pretty easy. It'll dry. That's not going to be a big deal. How do you strip it off? One conversation I had, it sounded like a notch in a 2x4, and you draw the stems through it, cut the stems off, and draw them through. There are some mechanization options, and here's what you want to look at. And I didn't have time to really search a lot of these things out, but in conversations with other people, look at the tea industry. So that sounds kind of weird to you, but tea, you know, growing tea leaves and all that kind of stuff, they're recovering the same parts of the plant that you guys are. And so that's a good resource to get ideas and so forth is, hey, how are they handling tea leaves and getting them off the stems and stuff like that. So there's something to look at. But there are some stripping machines that will do some things. We have some that we're working with in the laboratory. I'm working with one of the lab groups in the UK right now trying to come up with a little different design. But the one that they have that works pretty well is basically 2 conveyor belts. So if you picture 2 conveyor belts that come together, so like a conveyor on a sandwich, and you put the material in between those conveyor belts. And if those conveyor belts run the same speed, it runs the material through. So what you do is slow down one of the conveyors. You slow down the top conveyor. So it runs a little bit slower, and the bottom one runs a little bit faster. And so you get kind of a stripping, rolling action of that material that's going through there. And they found that works pretty well. So the conveyor belts are a textured belt. It's not a smooth conveyor belt. It's one that has like a diamond pattern on it or something like that. And so that one seemed to work well. They can drop the plants in there and it strips it off. For their laboratory research, what they're concerned about is they want to run different samples and strip it and then look at what the compounds and everything are on it. With that conveyor belt, this material is sticky, and so it sticks to the conveyor belt and it's cross-contaminating all their samples. So we're looking at some different things with some plastic rollers and stuff like that. I'm not sure it's going to be as effective in terms of stripping, but it'll still, you know, at least it'll be something they can clean and for the laboratory. So those are some of the concepts and some of the ideas. So again, you know, this is really new, even for engineers, even for anybody that's trying to figure out how to handle it. And I think it's going to keep changing. It's going to be dynamic as we figure out how we're going to grow this stuff, what our plant densities are going to be, what the plants are going to look like. Can we recover the bulk material and dry it and be able to handle that rather than needing to recover the whole plant? And so there, you know, there's just a lot of questions that we need to deal with. And so